Now, rule 2 says, when we change from direct to indirect speech, we also make changes to pronouns, possessive adjectives, possessive pronouns, and time expressions. I already said this earlier, okay? And we know what pronouns are, words used instead of nouns. And we know possessive adjectives are those words that come before nouns, showing more like showing ownership. Yeah, for example, if I say my car, his bag, her bag, okay, my immediately coming before the car is a possessive adjective, is a kind of, yeah, you remember that lesson, his bag, her bag, his and her there immediately coming before the noun are possessive adjectives. Possessive pronouns are those ones where you put yours, okay, his, hers, yours, mine, those ones, right, theirs. Now, time expressions are like today, yesterday, tomorrow, last year. We see how these things change, okay? Now, this is an example of a direct speech. Says they said, comma, quotation open. We went to Korea last week. We went to Korea last week. Now, we is the pronoun, went is the verb, last week is the time expression. Now, see how they change here. They said that. I told you to never forget this that. It's very important in your indirect speech. They said that they had gone to Korea the previous week. So, we, the pronoun we changes to they. Okay? Went changes to had gone. I told you it takes a step back. So, simple past tense becomes past perfect tense. Okay? Last week, the time expression changes to the previous week. All right? The one about the change in pronoun is kind of common sense. Here, in direct speech, you're saying it exactly how these people said it. So, if, for example, I was part of the group of people at the time I was speaking, I can't be talking about me and the people in the group with me and I say they. I'm talking about us, right? So I'll say we are going to Korea. But if, for example, the person I'm talking to wants to report what I said about me and the people in my group, she's not going to be saying we, because of course she's not talking about herself and she's not reporting exactly what we said. Now she's going to be saying what I said about me and my group members. So she's going to say they said. So it's kind of like common sense, all right? The one about pronoun. But the one about the verb, I told you, takes a step backwards, all right? And the one about the time expression, this one, there's kind of like a small table. I think the remember box is going to help you with that one. They're things you have to memorize, okay? There's, for example, today becomes that day. Yesterday becomes the day before or the previous day. Tomorrow becomes the following day. Do you understand? Those ones, there are specific words for them, which makes the one for time expression easier for you to learn. So there are specific words for them, which you can memorize and get used to, all right? Now, another example. Here it says, Mr. Steve said, I will take my family to Disneyland next year. So let's see how the pronoun I changes. Will take, the verb, let's see how the verb will take changes. My, the demonstrative adjective, let's see how that will change. And next year, the time expression, let's see how all these change. Now, Mr. Stevens, I said Steve earlier, regardless. Mr. Stevens said that he would take his family to Disneyland the following year. So see, here, I changes to he. I told you it's common sense, right? So Mr. Steve said that he. You can't say Mr. Steve said that I. No. You only use I here in the direct speech when you're saying it exactly how Mr. Steve said it at the time. Because here Mr. Steve is talking to you and he's saying what he will do. So if Mr. Steve is talking to you, he's not going to say, Mr. Steve is not going to try to tell you that he wants to take his family to Disneyland and he says he will take his family. No, he's talking about himself. So he'll say, I will take my family. But when you're reporting the speech in the indirect speech, now you're not going to be saying, Mr. Steve said that you're not the one taking your family. It's Mr. Steve, and Mr. Steve is a man. So he said that he will. So this he is pointing to Mr. Steve, okay? I told you it's all about common sense here. So Mr. Steve said that he now will take, changes, this will changes to would. See? Will changes to would. Will take, would take. Now, this demonstrative adjective here, demonstrative adjective, my family, of course. Whose family? Mr. Steve's family. So his family. Just like here changed to he. Here, his family. All right? To Disneyland next year becomes the following year. Okay? Whenever you have next day, next year, next month, next usually changes to the following. All right? And past or last changes to the year, the previous or the year before, something like that. All right? So you see a little table of it here. Pronoun I changes to he. Verb will take changes to would take. Time next year changes to the following year. Possessive adjective my changes to his. And now this remember box here for you to take your time and study carefully. All right? It says with indirect speech, not all the exact words of the speaker are used, of course. Not the exact words of the speaker are used. We're changing the verbs. We're changing the demonstrative nouns, demonstrative adjectives and pronouns. We're changing the timestamp. So this is basically what they mean here. The second point in the remember box says the following changes are made to verbs in the indirect speech. This is the table showing you what I said about the verb taking a step backward. So see, simple present in the direct speech, simple present changes to simple past worked. Simple past changes to past perfect had worked. So take your time to study this remember box, okay? Now, rule 3, which is more like an exception to the general rule that you have to change the verb in the person's words. You know that? I told you the speech verb stays the same. That is the dialogue word. The said stays the same, but the second verb, which is in the actual words of the speaker, that verb is the one that changes, okay? But there's an exception to changing that verb. If what the person said is still true, the verb remains the same. Let's see an example. We do not change the tense of verbs in indirect speech if what we report is still true. Someone said something to you yesterday, okay? And today you're trying to report what that person said to another person in indirect speech. If what that person said as at yesterday is still true as at today, you won't change the verb, you leave it the same. Let's see an example. Our science teacher said water freezes at 0 degrees centigrade. Okay, this is what your science teacher said, that water freezes at 0 degrees. At 0 degrees centigrade. Now, at the point you're reporting what your science teacher said, if water still freezes at 0 degrees, then there's no need to change this freezes. It's still going to remain the same because what you're saying is still true at the time you're reporting it. Okay, so our science teacher said that water freezes at 0 degrees centigrade. See, because at the time you're reporting the speech, what your science teacher said is still true. So you leave the verb the same. Freezes. So that's the only exception to the general rule of changing up the verb. If at the time of reporting the speech, in the indirect speech, just a quick note, I should have made it at the beginning. Indirect speech is same as reported speech, okay? So when I keep saying to report, remember when you're reporting a person, you're saying what that person said. It's kind of common sense. So indirect is same as reported, okay? So if at the time you're reporting what that person said, and if what that person said is still true, at the time of reporting it, what that person said is still true, please leave the verb the same, okay? Now you're going to go ahead and solve all the practices. You know the drill. So I'll be waiting for you to turn in your proof of work, after which I'm going to upload the corrections to all the practices, okay? Good luck, girls.